And we're back for our second episode of All in the Field, AWS Agriculture Live.
All right, we have the first of our 4 agriculture episodes that are focused on startups. And so we had a lot of fun planning and prepping for this episode. We've learned a lot, and we hope that you enjoy hearing all about the startups that are active in agriculture.
Welcome to AWS All in the Field. I'm Rachel Bradshaw, a go-to-market specialist for IoT and agriculture. If you joined us last week, you met me already, but just to remind everyone, I'm based in Seattle, Washington. I'm a passionate advocate for IoT, agriculture, and startups, and we're going to be talking about pieces of all 3 of those passions today, so I'm super excited. Also, if you joined us on the last show, you recalled how much we like to stay apprised of the latest in technology and food, and we will be talking a little bit about both today, so excited about that. And as always, I'm joined by my partner in crime, Karen.
I feel like one day we're gonna actually get in trouble for doing a crime together, and then they'll come back to this episode. But my name is Karen Hildebrand, and I am our worldwide head of solutions architecture for the agriculture industry. And so I have been in agriculture my whole life. I grew up on a farm, 4th generation, and have done a lot of my education related to machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we talk a lot about this, Rachel, but I am so excited that AWS is in the agriculture space and is providing the backbone for a lot of really innovative applications that are pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And so today we should head over to our field notes, and we'll get started on telling you about some of the cool things that we're seeing and sharing with you what's new in ag. Rachel, let's start our lightning round. We're going to go today around the globe in agriculture, and we're going to talk about startups, what they're building, and why.
That's right. And today we're starting in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. We're talking about Perinia, who built a cost of production application. And Perinia Food and Agriculture recognized that there was a challenge that the agriculture industry faced, and that was having a clear understanding of their cost of production. So they decided to do something about it. And what they did was they built this application that acts as an aggregation point of data that is ingesting different variety of data from edge devices, including power sensors, fuel sensors, GPS tracking, and water monitoring. And at a high level, it enables the user to see the actual spend against that usage all in one place, whether it be on a computer or a smartphone or a tablet. And you're able to analyze reports and make intelligent business decisions based on the information displayed. And you can receive alerts if anything seems amiss. So super cool. Where are we going next, Karen?
Let's head over to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And as we journey across our globe here, we are going to talk about 30 megahertz. And what 30 megahertz has done is really address some of the big challenges in agriculture around connectivity and understanding how to persist data on the edge. So they've built hardware devices and are using IoT Core and IoT Greengrass in order to connect those devices and ensure that they have persistence. They've worked already before joining with AWS or using AWS as their backbone. They had a hardware device, and we worked with them in partnership and helping them to make sure that none of that data would be lost. They're using LoRa networks for connectivity, which is a great pattern that we're seeing in rural and remote environments. And so they've been able to really help understand indoor growing environments, make that data available, and have a control plane that assists within the growing of specialty crops. So where are we off to next, Rachel?
Hinakura, New Zealand with Riverwatch. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I was practicing, I'm not going to lie. But Riverwatch is protecting the environment. They understand that the importance of data for monitoring the health of the natural environment was such an inspiration initially that they're now actually putting into place as a startup by using waterborne drones to monitor the quality of New Zealand's inland waterways. Riverwatch founders James Muir came up with this idea after seeing the health of a river near his father's farm deteriorate due to unsound farming practices further upstream. And he realized that the need to collect more data to show government stakeholders and encourage landowners and farmers and community groups to take their own action to improve waterways was super important. So it spurred this idea of a real-time monitor that you can have anchored in the river that sends data consistently back to you so that you always know what's happening in the water. And it debuted its prototype floating river drone in 2019, and they were submerged with interest from quite a few people. And they were able to incorporate low-cost sensors that monitor a variety of factors relating to river health, such as oxygen levels, turbidity, and water temperature. So super cool. And what's next?
I was going to say that is really cool. I get really excited when I see things, especially when it's like a submersible. It looks like a little mini submarine, so it's pretty cool. So we're going to head actually off to Israel, staying in the submersible space. And we're going to talk about Gilly Ocean, who's got a GoSmart technology that they have developed, and it is specific for aquaculture. So understanding using computer vision and a underwater camera how to do biomass detection. And so this is a really interesting segue. It actually goes really nicely into our upcoming episode. Next episode is all going to be about computer vision. So just a little call out to put October 1st on your calendar as well, because we will be talking about how computer vision can be used in agriculture. And in this particular case, it's being used to help with biomass detection. So understanding the fish that are in the pen, as well as understanding the potential biomass, but indicating if there's any concerns to health or if there's any actions that need to be taken around fish and those that how the stock is doing at any given time. So back to you. Your turn, Rachel.
Yeah, we're going all the way back to Vancouver, British Columbia, back in Canada with Simios, which does pest detection. And I talked a little bit about this last week because I think it's super cool where they've built this IoT-based ag tech solution. And they offer a few different solutions, but at its simplest, they provide growers data on climate and pests and diseases in their orchards. And so these IoT boxes are equipped with sensors and cameras to monitor for different types of insects and can deploy pheromones to attract and trap the insect that it detects. It also has, or some of their devices have capability to identify the pests, and if need be, only spray the chemical that's needed and at the minimum level needed so that you're not just spraying the entire crop. And, that's impactful to the environment. These devices also forecast both pest and disease activity, as I mentioned. They're able to automate moisture tracking and management. There's frost alerts on it. It saves growers money and it protects their yield. So super, super exciting.
And I think we have a few other questions here. So I think, Rachel, you're going to have an opinion on this one. From Alex Masha. That's a good thing. It wasn't a bad thing. Is IoT going to change food habits and make the human diet healthier?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see it impacting the way food habits are. I'd rather say yes, it is changing food habits. It's helping with increased yields. It's helping expand crops as people look to do more controlled environment agriculture, and therefore making food more accessible across the globe, and in some cases even slightly cheaper, because when you have a greater yield, you're able to reduce costs at times, and using IoT to improve efficiencies across your farm and save money. A lot of times we see people pass that on to their consumers and their customers. So I think in that regard, there's definitely a chance it will help make human diets healthier. That said, people like what they like, so they will eat what they want to eat.
So maybe our end goal here is actually to enable people to have choice in what they want to eat, as opposed
Yeah.
to helping them eat healthier.
Yes, that's right. Have the option to be healthy if you want to be.
I think that's a fair point.
Or
Okay, right
hey,
on.
French fries are potatoes too, right? So
You got it. Excellent. So I think we are going to move on to our next guest, and we are going to go ahead and welcome in from the United States, Steve Valencian, who is the founder and CEO of Growers, and he is joining us today from North Carolina.
Hey,
Welcome,
Rachel,
Steve.
Karen, how are you guys? Yeah, good.
Good.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Joining us. So you probably tell the story better than any of us could introduce you, but would you mind telling us how your story in agriculture has gone and what brought you now to where you are with growers?
Yeah, no, good question. It's been quite a journey, and it's an interesting story nonetheless. So yeah, I started Growers about 10 years ago, but really been involved in agriculture my entire life. So it's a not a new concept, but we've been working on trying to build technology to help connect farmers and their advisors. And we started as a services business, actually being the advisor to farmers. And so we're coming from a position of empathy and understanding, and the fact that I grew up farming and actually still farm a little bit on my own, I think puts us in a pretty good spot to understand at least both sides of the equation, both from the farmer and the advisor. And that's the learning that we took and applied it to the technology that we're building today. So yeah, Growers is we're a company based out of Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, and we're servicing farmers pretty much all across North America now.
All right, so 1 minute pitch. What is the kind of 3 biggest problems that Growers solves as a platform?
Yeah, well, so I think you got to kind of understand maybe the current state of the problem, in that there's a lot of technology that's on the market today. Unfortunately, what we found is that it all seems to be a little bit rearward looking. And what farmers really need is data and technology that can be actionable and timely and help them make better decisions on how to go forward. And that was the chief thing that we discovered when we were the advisor. Like, Karen, you can appreciate this, right? Is that farmers are optimists, right? And they're always looking forward, but all the technology and data analytics and dashboards and reports today have this rearward view look. And so we built a tool that helps aggregate a bunch of really important data from soils and sensors and machines, as well as financial information, consolidate that into one platform, and then allow an advisor and a farmer to execute on it quickly, primarily around the decisions that they need to make for seed, fertilizer, and chemical recommendations. We focus on those 3 because they're the ones that accurate data, I think, can drive the best impact or the highest overall impact when it comes to a ROI standpoint. And that's what we've been focused on for about 2.5 years now. And now we're spending a little bit more time working with ag retailers and trying to help them kind of consolidate their sales planning process and talk about positioning their products more appropriately and using data to help drive those decisions now.
Can we dive into that a little further? I love that it aggregates and combines, you said seed, chemical, and fertilizer, but can we dive a little further? How does it actually integrate those 3 sources? How are you able to do that?
Yeah, so today we're doing it inside of our AWS environment, but we're taking information from various different soil testing laboratories. So data that's taken from labs, analyzed, sent to the cloud, and then once it's in the cloud, we're pulling that information down and combining that back with the exact spatial location that the samples were taken. Then we're integrating machinery data from My John Deere and Climate and all of the actual physical equipment that's in the field. And then we're layering in financial data, and then we have a few kind of key data points on our platform that are actually user entered. One of the really cool things about our product is that we call it a zero data entry technology, because it really only lets you enter 3 digits, and usually those have to do with adjusting your prices. And so That's been a really big feature for farmers and for agronomists, because like nobody wants to spend a bunch of time doing data entry, and I certainly didn't, and that's why we built the tool in the way that we did. I hate it. I hate doing data entry, so we've had a lot of luck with that functionality.
I would love to know the person or the farmer that says, you know what, I'd really like to do data entry instead. So I think
No, they don't
that's
exist.
pretty.
Yeah.
I don't think it
But it's
exists
funny
either.
because,
It doesn't
like,
exist.
I mean,
Put it in the chat.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you mentioned a number of the other platforms. How did you find the seam that was the right seam for growers? And then not only you found it, but you have really transitioned to, a serverless architecture. You're using some pretty state-of-the-art services and really a lot of geospatial processing. How did you find
Yeah.
that seam, and what kind of services are you using to enable growers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we, found it by experiencing kind of all of the pain and heartache, ourselves, and especially myself. Like I tell the story all the time of like a time I was combining, soybeans, and I farm in North Carolina, and there was like this hurricane coming in, and I like literally didn't care about anything other than getting the beans out, and my yield monitor quit working. And so like I wasn't recording any data and like didn't care. But then like the whole time I'm like kicking myself because I felt like a hypocrite, right, for not actually capturing this information. And so it was like, that's kind of how we like figured out that like, hey, there's an opportunity here that we need to build more simplified technology so that like problems like this aren't actually problems, and that there's so much value in that data that like I would have stopped anything, right, even for a hurricane to capture it. So like we took that understanding, and then, like you said, integrated it. The complexity of it was like trying to find out how do you make spatial data and all of this information come together. That's been a kind of a crazy journey for us. And like what you're showing here on the screen is like what we found is that a lot of the technology that AWS was offering us was really kind of key to helping us connect those dots and make those connections actually possible, and doing that within a time frame that matters, right? Like latency is a real big issue in agriculture. And again, like for information to be valuable, we think it has to be timely and has to be accurate. And that's really hard to do. It's really hard to pull that information through any data pipeline. And we found, some of the best solutions inside the AWS toolkit, and using things like Lambda and even Redshift for some of the analysis and the data processing that we're doing, ultimately trying to deliver the most accurate data possible to an advisor in the quickest manner possible, and with as few human touch points as possible.
Oh, that's great. So I have to ask too, because you're talking about human touch points, especially at AWS, we are so customer obsessed. How do you continue to innovate and make sure that you're getting feedback from growers on your platform so that you're staying ahead of the game?
Yeah, it's a good question. It takes a lot of effort, and like you have to be intentional about it. And so we've been, in this business for 10 years and have like experienced, a ton of growth that we've been really blessed with. But it's like I've seen this like curve of our product development and really like the value that we can deliver to customers. And it correlates exactly with the amount of time we've invested in collecting customer feedback, right? When we first started, we were obsessed as well, and like probably annoyingly obsessed with pestering our customers around like, what do you think about this? What about this? What if we did that? How about this? Do you like that? Why not? And it really showed in the first launch of our product, and we got a really high adoption very, very quickly, and it completely like overwhelmed our entire system, which is coincidentally why we're have entirely rebuilt it. Is that we got enough demand that we actually our architecture and our technology couldn't support it. But yeah, back to the customer point. Is then we got really busy and we started to kind of slip, and then like you start to see that lack of customer touch points or lack of customer feedback start to impact the product. And I think any business is faced, especially small businesses and startups are faced with this, is like you think you're hiring a bunch of really smart people that have like a bunch of great ideas, and those great ideas are making their way into your product. the reality of it is like nobody's ever going to be smarter than your customer, including your employees. They're just the ones responsible for, articulating what your customer wants into, computer code and engineering architecture to make it a reality. And so when we got back on track and like became obsessed with making sure that we were constantly capturing that customer feedback, it shows in the product. I mean, we just did a demo for a new product we're launching in November with a ag retailer. And one of the first things that he told us after we did the demo with him was like, wow, I can tell you really listened to my feedback. We're like, yes, we did.
I was going to say that is the perfect thing to hear. And,
Yeah.
I think that's actually something that's pretty unique about what Growers has done is how you really moved from startup to being able to scale. So how have you worked with some of those, larger egg retailers who are using your platform? How have you figured out to go from, startup, good idea, to making sure that it's, available broadly in the market?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it's like kind of connected to the customer feedback one, is that agriculture is such a complex space, and it's got such a mix of characters from all of the players that are in here, that there's like so many problems in so many different areas, and like everybody needs help, and ourselves included. And I think it was this like connection that we had to, the boots on the ground, like actually being a farmer and being an advisor and having to work with ag retailers and insurance agents and bankers and like all of the relationships that are in agriculture. I think it enabled us, like when we approached ag retail, for instance, or when we approach insurance companies, we can do it from a little bit of a position of empathy, right? Because like we understand part of that complexity. And one of the things that we've always been pretty keen on is like, we're not trying to boil the ocean and solve everybody's problems all at once. We've been trying to be laser focused on finding what's that one unique pain point, and then just perfecting that, right? So for our very first product, it was variable rate seed fertilizer prescriptions. That's it. Like that, we could do nothing else. But we figured out how to do that in 100 times faster than any other product in the market. And that gave us the adoption and allowed us to expand into a bunch of other features. So I think it's, finding that problem and being relatable has really opened up a lot of opportunities in a bunch of different industries that are starting to get a little bit further away from the farmer, meaning, financial and insurance and even land management and things like that, which has been super exciting because we're just, again, finding out how fantastically complicated this industry called agriculture is.
That's right. You talk about a mix of characters. Karen and I always consider ourselves a mix of characters, and we definitely need help all the time. One more question for you. What are the key insights you would share with other startups when choosing a technology partner? Like, what are the lessons learned if you were to give guidance to others?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I feel like the only things we've done right so far because we did them wrong the first time. And so, I think it's, I don't know if there's another way you can learn things, but if there are, please tell me, because that seems to be the only way we learn anything. So scalability and flexibility, I think, are the two key words that our engineering team and our product team are focused on, this year. And I think those are the, looking back, on the past 4 or 5 years as we've been doing this, is understanding what these short-term compromises that all small companies and startups have to make in order to, hit revenue goals and keep investors happy and satisfy customers. You're making it's just compromise after compromise after compromise. And usually the first thing to go, right, is that we're going to build a solution that maybe won't be as scalable and maybe won't be as flexible, but we'll come back and try to address it later. And I think those are situations and decisions that need to be extremely well thought out, because the long-term implications for those are extremely expensive. And then the last thing I'll say is choosing a partner in the space. This is probably a good forum to talk about, the evolution that our business had did with AWS. When I got introduced to the worldwide business development lead for agriculture, and then actually Karen introduced me to you, I remember the lessening of, or feeling a lot less anxiety trying to talk with the AWS team about solutions for agriculture, because you guys and your team actually understood what it was that we were talking about, which is unique because I think I've said the complexity of agriculture probably like 10 times since we started. But it really is like that. And it's hard to explain that to somebody else. And so you guys were able to put us in contact. Well, actually, to back up, I remember the first question that it was Nathan. He's the global head of business development for agriculture. He asked me, he's like, who's your account manager? I was like, I literally have no idea. And he's like, oh, well, we need to change that. And so he put me in contact with our current account manager, is a woman named Beth, and we have a solutions architect named Cullen. And they like immediately seemed to almost take ownership of the challenges and the problems that we were having, and have been really instrumental in kind of connecting us with a bunch of AWS partners. We're working with a firm called Paraveda that has some familiarity and experience solving some of these challenges, and that was all facilitated through our account manager. And then on top of that, some of the AWS, like the Kickstarter programs and the Activate programs that we've been able to be involved in, have really helped, kind of spearhead some of these decisions around, doing migrations, right? Because we were in dual environments from a cloud storage standpoint, and having to make that shift is, I think I'd probably rather get my teeth pulled. But having access to a group of people that can support us through that, makes it a little less scary, as well as just the infinite amount of resources that we seem to have. So, again, we made that decision wrong the first time, and we paid for it dearly. So choosing a technology partner and providers that understand the business that you're in and are willing to spend time understanding that, I think has been a really big deal for us, and one of the kind of key success factors, I think, as you think about our current tech stack.
You're just full of fun things to do. Enter things manually, get your teeth pulled. Like, I love this.
Man, yeah.
Our chat is blowing up, so I have got to ask you a few questions. And
Sure.
I am going to start with C222. How does growers keep itself from tailoring its products to the early adopters and make sure that the product covers prospective customers as well?
Oh, yeah, that's coming from somebody who knows, I can tell. Because that's the problem, is like agriculture is all nuanced, and every single, like, you'll never meet a farmer that would ever tell you that they farm like their neighbors do, right? They have their own unique special way of doing things, and ag retail and everybody else is really the same way. Like, everything is nuanced all the time. So from a product standpoint, it's overwhelming and seems like daunting and nearly impossible. But to kind of reiterate the flexibility component that I mentioned earlier, is like, those are the inflection points that you need to spend time thinking about, right? And making sure you always leave your way out, or always leave yourself a way out, I should say. And able to make modules and elements and things that are more customizable, so you can adapt them. And like, truth be told, like, there's going to be times where you are going to have to make some compromises and solve some problems for key accounts or big accounts. We've done that all the time. But we also did things way back when, like hard coding the dollar sign into our UI. And so when the first person from Canada is like, oh, we don't use dollars, can you help us? And we're like, no, not really. So it's about being flexible, I think, is the key way to address that problem. But that's a good question, because it's a serious issue.
As long as you can represent the loony and toony, I'm good. I'll get over it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Canadian jokes, they'll come all day long if you want. I'll only ask one more question, because I know that our chat is so exciting. We could talk for hours, but I am going to butcher this handle. So Puzzy Wuzzy? Something like that, whatever. Close enough. Hopefully you know who you are. Do you have any of the work that Growers does open source on GitHub, or do you use any, I'm going to add on to this, do you use any open source in your product?
Yeah, we do where it makes sense. Definitely. I think we're always big advocates for trying to figure out, if there's a more, economical way to do things. And directly to answer the question on if we have any of our work open source on GitHub, I think the answer would be not yet. It's probably a better question for our director of engineering as we've been retooling things. But I think it brings up a really interesting point that I feel quite passionately about from a technology strategy standpoint as it relates to like open source versus proprietary and things like that. Is certainly there's tons of benefits to open source technology. That's undeniable. There's also a lot of benefits when it comes to speed and execution for using branded or proprietary stuff too, right? We're trying to build a team and a business that's best in class at the things that we think only we can be best in class in, and partner with companies and providers that do things much better than we will, right? Like Redshift and some of the tools that we're using inside the AWS environment, that we just have no interest in trying to recreate that, because we think there's things that we can do, better with our time and resources. And so we approach that, that question and that challenge as a really delicate balance, because I think it's a strategic decision.
That is fair and a great response. So thanks for your time. I am obviously great at live streams. So thanks for your time, Stephen. I really appreciate it.
No,
appreciate you taking
thanks
time
for
to
having me. No, this has been fun. Good luck. We'll talk soon. I appreciate all your guys' help.
Anytime.
Great. Thank you.
Love working with you.
Bye. All right, Karen, that was great. That was very insightful. And now we get to move on to one of my favorite sections, and that's the field's tips and tricks. So what do you got for us today?
All right, so I am going to pivot back to my computer because we actually have a demo of how to use data that is publicly available in order to create a simplified experience. So we heard from both of our startup founders that it's great to have as much information as possible in one pane of glass. And so what we're going to talk about today is, really quickly, I'm going to move through this. We are going to use a microarchitecture. So I'm not going to pretend this is your full system. It is not. This is really just pulling in data from the Registry of Open Data, which is an S3 bucket, using Glue to crawl that, Athena to query it, and then we will go into QuickSight so that you can actually see that I am not making this up. So we are going to use on the Registry of Open Data the Historical Climate Network Daily, which then I am going to, I am so fast, I am going to go over here and go into Glue. I'm going to add a table. And so there's a couple different ways you can do that. You can use a crawler. I'm going to do it manually because I can. I am going to name this table. And I am always terrible at demos in real time, but I think maybe demo egg makes sense for this. You can tell I can't talk at the same time as doing things. Then we'll go out and we'll pull the database that I already created. So that's GHCND egg. And now this is an S3 bucket. So the only difference is that I'm going to say it's not in my account. And then I'm going to actually paste in the path to the bucket. And ta-da, I can go to next. And after I get that done, this is a CSV format. And so in any of these data sets, there's actually documentation that indicates what it is that you're working on and what the format is, and then all of actually the structure of that data, so you can use that. But in Martha Stewart fashion, I already got that ready for you. So the table is out there in Glue, and we're going to hop over into Athena. And this is just a basic query in Athena, so it's nothing fancy, nothing too intimidating here, just a little SQL. And I'm going to go over to the database that we created so that I can see the tables that were pulled in. And all I've done, as you could probably tell from my crazy accent, I'm Canadian. So I picked a weather station in Canada that is right near where I grew up. So I actually knew how to ground truth all the information coming in. And then I just threw in here the calculation for growing degree days. And I used wheat as the crop. Now, this would change depending on the type of commodity. So this isn't a math lesson. This is just a simple understanding that this is in the realm of possible. You can also run geospatial querying in Athena. So although I made this simple for a demo, you can definitely go in and actually change that to a geospatial query, so you're retrieving the station closest to a boundary. Anyway, speed is life. Moving along, run the query. It is over there. Rachel, you're going to laugh at me. I always do these funny. So I'm going to head into QuickSight just so that you have an idea of how that could be visualized. Again, this can be totally part of another application that you've built, but we wanted to share here. And I'm going to go in here and do something creative again. And I'll pull down the database that we already created. I always click this button. I don't know what's wrong with me. I like to validate things. I don't know. I go down to the database and you'll see GHC and DAG, which I already had created in there. And then you'll see the tables that I just created in Athena. So click that and ta-da, magic happens within the console. I could use Spice. I'm not going to. I'm going to actually directly query my data. Spice is awesome. Purpose of this demo, don't need it. So I'm going to click and head on into the visualization platform. QuickSight's like a lot of BI platforms. It's really handy that it tells you what's metrics and how you can drag and drop them. It'll give you visual guidance advice, which is super nice for people like me. And then I'm going to go into the wrong dashboard. I pre-baked one for this too, but I'm going to go in the right one. And with any luck,
Karen?
Come again, Rachel?
Oh, sorry. What would customers use this for? Like as you're walking through this?
Well, I can tell you, so like growing degree days is really useful in understanding what variety you're going to select, especially as the change of temperatures have come about. So what type of variety, new hybrids definitely influence that selection, and your crop rotation patterns. So you can have a sense of kind of how that's changed. In this case, I pulled it for the past 10 years. And then like any typical farmer, I pulled up here a conversation I regularly have with my dad, which is how many growing degree days happened this year versus last year at the same time. So we actually stopped this debate. He was not very happy with me continuing to bring this up all the time. And so we stopped at the end of June. So I stopped my demo at that time. But in addition to what I just showed that you could do with historical information, you can also use an SNS topic and subscribe to that for forecast information. So we have on the Registry of Open Data forecasting models as well. And for those who don't have good connectivity, we also have a really cool blog out there that hopefully we'll post in the chat, where you can do a chatbot with SMS messages. You could request the forecast for your location and it'll send you that information right back. So kind of cool from a tech tip.
Very cool. And what if I wanted finer grain control of my application, wanted to do more custom, I don't know, automation with my script files? Do I have to do this in the console, or could I use a command line interface?
You absolutely do not have to do this in the console. I just like to show it in the console because it's more approachable and easy to use. But absolutely everything I showed you today, you could do command line, and you can integrate it into a number of different pipelines. So that could also be used in SageMaker and your machine learning models, creating feature sets. There's all kinds of unique nifty tricks that I could have showed you today, but you can definitely do this in the command line.
Oh, this was so great. I mean, I've seen it a couple of times, but I feel like it refreshes my memory and I still learn every time you show it. So thanks so much, Karen. Let's move on to our next segment, which is also a segment I love, and that's the Make an Impact Challenge. And, you know, Karen, you and I talk about this, that in agriculture, many startups want to connect with others that, you know, that they have the same passion and they want to bring forward ways to make an impact and share the skills that they have and the skills that you need. And the Sentinel Hub custom script contest is going on, and it's open for contributions until October 31st, 2020. And it's a great way to connect with others. Previous contributions and commits align with many of the questions we hear from our customers that we work with today in agriculture and forestry, such as wanting to understand geospatial processing and satellite imagery to do everything from field boundary detection, plant phenophasing, to understanding forestry stands and or deforestation patterns and the impact of wildfires, especially right now with all the fires going on in the US, right? So
yeah, it's really a awesome contribution to the earlier question about open source. All of the contributions of the custom script contest are open source and available. So I do want to mention the previous winners, just so that it gives our people that are watching a sense of what's possible, what's already been open source commit based on previous submissions, and hopefully it gives some really unique ideas of what could be submitted in this round. So this round again closes October 31st. So let's take a look at the 3 winners that we've had and previous, or that have committed and contributed to the open source previously. So we have, let's see here. So our first place the first place was Jean-Baptiste out of Luxembourg, and he submitted an anomaly detection model, and that was based on NDVI and understanding drought that occurred in Germany in 2018. And the second place contribution came from Nicholas out of France, and he worked on a deforestation model. And particularly, this model was focused on deforestation actions that happened in Madagascar. And so he was able to create a custom script based on that event and be able to commit that again to open source. And then finally, the third place submission was Antonio from Spain, and he did a canopy density model. And he was really great in his commit. He also indicates not only what it was that he was able to build in the custom source scripts, but what are some improvements that he wanted to make. So out on GitHub, you can actually see not only what his original contribution was, but his suggestions for improvement. So really awesome way for technologists to get involved, especially with geospatial and Earth observation processing. And that script contest, I think, is going to be dropped into the chat so that you have the ability to sign up and participate and connect with others that are in agriculture that are doing these really cool custom scripts for Earth observation.
That's right. And you might get featured on our show, at least a name drop, right? And who doesn't want that? So that alone should motivate you to go sign up for this contest. Well, that takes us all the way up to the end of our episode. Thank you so much for joining. Resources will be shared in the chat stream.
If you have suggestions or topics that you want us to cover, happy to do that. Always helps when we have ideas for our next episode. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time at All in the Field.